Hello, wonderful person. I hope you're having a wonderful week full of peace and joy and laughter. So, this week's article is about stress and what is underneath stress. So, how do you know when you're experiencing a stress response? What is underneath stress, and what is the right way to release stress? Control, perfectionism, resistance, force, aggression, evasion, overwhelm, anxiety, worry, and obsessive thinking all have the same root: fear. But fear isn't a bad thing, it has its uses. Fear prompts the natural stress response that occurs neurologically and biologically and informs us that it's time to fight, or freeze. We have this as an inherent built-in mechanism in our bodies and brains to help us identify threats so that we can survive. Objectively, fear has its purpose, and it is a necessary part of our makeup. We've needed this throughout human existence, and we continue to need it to be able to respond to real threats in real time. When fear loses its usefulness and interferes with joy, peace, freedom, close relationships, and enjoyment of life, is when we go into a fear stress response to a perceived threat. Perceived threats occur when they trigger difficult memories or experiences, and our body and brain is unable to discern the real from the perceived threat in a moment of heightened agitation. So we respond in a controlling, resistant, forceful, aggressive, or evasive manner that does not move us toward the person we want to be and the life we want to lead, or the relationships we want to have. So we can stay stuck in these stress or fear loops, and it can have a major impact on our lives, our health, and our relationships. When we go into these stress or fear responses, it can show up in many ways. So for example, whenever control shows up in our lives, whether it's others trying to control our actions, or it is our own selves demonstrating control in any way, there is a root of fear that is playing out. Control can show up in so many ways, including perfectionism, self-righteousness, the need to argue and be right, the need to control others, possessiveness and jealousy, the need to have others do it your way, or the need for others to have it done their way. The same for resistance. Whenever we experience others resisting something, or we ourselves are resisting something or someone in our lives, fear is also present. Resistance shows up when there is a new way of doing something, or you or others experience a wall or pushback to the new way, the new idea, the different thing. Now for aggression. Aggression shows up as the fight response when we or someone we know experiences a threat. The aggression can be projected aggression when a person feels threatened, when their ideas feel threatened, when their livelihood feels threatened, or when their position feels threatened. Aggression typically shows up as behaviors, passive-aggressive or directly aggressive. It can be verbal aggression, like a tone of voice or saying something directly aggressive toward another to get them to back off, back down, or back away. It happens when we feel our physical or personal space or belongings or family are being encroached upon. Then there is the extreme version of how fear can manifest, and that is through force, shown either physically, verbally, or psychologically, typically labeled abuse, violence, or bullying. We can experience this form of this from the people in our lives, personal or professional lives, and we can also experience it through self-bullying. Force can show up when the person has not dealt with his or her own underlying fear and has created an illusion of threat in the other person, so he or she is forceful towards that individual. It occurs when the person's beliefs about the other person or the situation have solidified and there is no longer room for psychological flexibility, at least not yet. The person is a threat, and the response to that person is physical, verbal, or psychological attack. So in addition to the fight responses to fear, there is also the flight and freeze response. For example, when the need to withdraw, escape, evade show up, fear is typically present. This is the flight aspect of the stress response. There is something about the situation or person that prompts a need to flee or get away. Fleeing is experienced through the strong need to get out of here, get it over with, run away, be evasive. It can also be through lying, hiding, physically or emotionally, using drugs, sex, alcohol, or food. The freeze response can show up as shock also, or an inability to move, or a feeling of stuck or overwhelm. Anxiety and worry, as well as obsessive thinking, are also connected to fear and stress and can lead to the flight or freeze response. When you're in a state of anxiety, you're not quite sure if there will be a fight or if you'll want to get away and flee. So this can cause us to withdraw from personal and professional situations or also feel that our actions are futile. This occurs because the situation causing the anxiety is translated as a threat, and we may respond by running, evading, or by a feeling of anxiety in the body, for example, sweating or jitteriness. Because fighting and fleeing are not possible in that moment, we may experience a desire to want to take action, but not being able to, or feeling like we're not able to. And so that settles in our body as unease, which can create that anxiety. So fear can be the underlying basis for all of this. So how do we get out of this loop? Well, for starters, learning about our own stress loop can help us not only to deal and manage with our own stress, but also to help us see when others are in their own stress loop. And perhaps that seeing and that noticing when others are in their stress loop will help us have greater compassion for them, as well as an understanding and wisdom on how best to deal with someone who is acting toward us from a stress response. So while we would never tell our loved ones directly that when they're having a stress response to calm down, that would be ineffective. We may instead share this article or point them in the direction of resources to help them learn more about managing their fear and stress responses. But if the relationship isn't close and that isn't something that you feel comfortable with, then perhaps creating some distance where you can hold an understanding of what they may be going through that prompts them to act in a stress response towards you or around you, but giving them some space where you're not directly engaged with this individual. And of course, if you're experiencing violence, please seek the necessary help. Understanding does not take the place of keeping you physically and mentally safe from harm. So this week's guidance speaks to understanding stress and how it relates to fear and ways to step out of this stress loop within yourself and in your relationships. I hope you find comfort and insight from this share, my friend. So here's some guidance for your journey this week. Intention. To understand how stress and fear go hand in hand. To identify how fear plays out in your life. To build self-awareness through self-reflection and begin to choose different actions that lead you to greater joy, peace, freedom, and closer relationships. So some points for self-reflection. This week is about reflecting on the ways fear and stress show up in your life. It is also about cultivating that self-awareness so that you can be a student of yourself. Self-reflection can help you name the fear, identify your response, discern between real or perceived threats, and work with yourself so that you are no longer reacting from autopilot. So with compassion, take some time this week to reflect on the following, and with compassion is emphasized here. Just always do this work with compassion towards yourself. Identify the person you want to be and the life you want to lead, the relationships you want to have with others, both personally and professionally. Come up with one word or a very short phrase that represents all of that for you. For example, loving, kind, peaceful, brave, joyful, self-care, whatever that word is for you. Next, identify the typical stress triggers that show up in your personal and professional life on a regular basis, i.e. people, situations. These are the people or situations or conversations that trigger a stress response in you. One of these may be, I never feel like I have enough time. That would be an example of a possible situation or thought process or belief system that causes stress for you. So look deeply at how these triggers impact you, your health, your energy levels, your joy, your peace, your relationships with people at home or at work, your feelings about life, your feelings about work. Look at the subtle impact as well as direct, obvious impacts on how these triggers impact you. Next, identify all the ways that you typically respond to those triggers. your autopilot behaviors, autopilot thoughts, beliefs, emotions. For example, behaviors that correspond to control, resistance, force, withdrawal, or that feeling of stuck. And then look deeply at how your responses to these triggers impact you, your health, your energy levels, your joy, your peace, your relationships with people at home and at work, or feelings about your life, your feelings about work. Look at the subtle impact as well as the direct, obvious impacts. And then tie your triggers to fear. Notice how stress and stress triggers connect to fear. So look deeply and be a student of yourself and name what you are afraid of when you experience the stress trigger and when you respond in a controlling, resistant, or forceful way. This will take complete and radical honesty with yourself, and it will not be easy, but it will be necessary. So if you have some challenge with radically being honest with yourself, I did write an article last month, or you can contact me directly to receive that article on being radically honest with yourself. It may be helpful for this process. With kindness, compassion, and from an adult objective perspective, look at the origin of the fear. I say adult objective perspective because sometimes when we're thinking about our fear or when we are triggered by our fear, we tend to revert back to the time in our life, typically when we were children, that we first experienced this fear. So from an adult objective perspective, keeping that place of compassion and objectivity, compassion and kindness, look at the origin of the fear. Identify the ways that your responses to these fears and stresses have kept you safe in the past. Show appreciation and gratitude for how you have kept yourself safe in the past. At times, this step can be painful or challenging or deeply rooted, or so deeply rooted that you may decide to seek additional help to help you through this part. Next, discern between true threats and perceived threats. So perceived threats are typically ones that bring up a lot of past pain and hurt. Perceived threats often come with a disproportionate response. Question yourself each time you experience a threat. Is it 100% true that this person or situation is unsafe? Or are you perceiving that you are unsafe because it resembles your past experiences? Next, in what ways can you help yourself feel more safe? What can you do to remind yourself that there is nothing to fear when it is a perceived threat? How can you show yourself that you've got this without the need to fight, flee, or freeze, without the need to control, resist, force, evade, withdraw? Then identify the behaviors and actions that you want to take when you are triggered instead of your autopilot behaviors. This is where you get to create the new you and the person you want to be. Identify why choosing new behaviors is important to you. Identify the short and long-term benefits to you. And take time to write a letter or have a conversation saying goodbye to the old you and thanking it for keeping you safe for so long, including why you are willing to let go of those old, controlling, resistant, forceful, or evasive ways of being. And also introduce the new you and how new ways and the new ways that you'll be using instead when you experience feelings of hurt or fear. So that was some reflection for the week around stress and fear. Now I'm going to go into this place of what to practice, things to do, rather than things to think about or reflect on. So practice. For this week, practice by reading about the body's stress response and what happens at the neurological, biological, physical, and psychological levels when our fear is triggered and what happens when we get into that stress response. This is an invaluable thing to do to educate ourselves on stress and the fear response in the bodies, what happens at all those different levels. So two great reads are Wired for Love, written about close relationships, but can also be transferred to work relationships or any relationships. And then there's also a book called Buddha's Brain. So learning more can help you identify what you or others in your life have gone, when you or others have gone into a stress response. It will just help you learn more and have that objective understanding. When a stress or fear trigger shows up, notice your reaction. So another thing to practice, notice your body's response. Notice how your communication or tone has changed. Do this from an objective noticing, just looking, just noticing, without judging, without evaluating, just noticing. And then pause, breathe, and give yourself an out. For example, if you go into a stress response or a fear response and you notice yourself changing in your body response, your body language, your tone, give yourself an out. Let the person you're speaking with know you need a minute or a day. Or if you're alone and you notice that, just give yourself a minute to take that pause, take that breath. Take the time to be kind, compassionate, and patient with yourself as you sit through your emotions. Sit through them, sit with them. Refrain from acting on autopilot, the things that you would typically do in the past when you were responding to stress. Choose the new way that you want to be and act. The way that leads you towards greater joy, peace, freedom, closer relationships. Do that action. So just to kind of reiterate here, call it what it is, fear. Pause, breathe, discern between real and perceived threat. Choose a different way, one that is aligned with what you want for yourself. So just for some examples of things that I do for stress relief. So under relaxation, I do silent meditation. Sometimes I just sit still. I journal. I get a massage or a reflexology massage, or give myself a reflexology massage on my hands or my feet. Experience acutonics. Do some yin yoga, which is relaxing postures that you hold for a longer time. Listen to relaxing music. I also do some aromatherapy, chamomile, lavender, or my own blends that I create with my diffuser. Or I drink a tea from a blend that I create for myself. So I have different kinds of teas that I can mix for myself depending on what I'm looking for. So if I want a relaxed mood, I might mix some chamomile and lavender and maybe some rose. So the other thing I do for stress relief, rather than recommend, what I do for stress relief is enjoyable movement. I don't particularly exercise heavily, but exercise can definitely help, and it is often recommended by one of my best friends to do some jumping jacks. For me, enjoyable movement is my preference. So I love to walk and hike. I love to do Tai Chi, swim, bike, and dance. So these are all enjoyable forms of movement for me, and I feel that's my way to go in terms of moving my body, and I always choose enjoyable movement. So other things that I do for stress relief are just have fun. So I might go to a movie, just be around somebody that's silly, be with myself, be silly. I may write. I love to write poetry. Or maybe have a fun outing with my friends or myself and try something new. I love to go to new places and try new things, or I take a class. I enjoy taking classes, and that is also a part of my stress relief. Or I might paint, something like that. Another thing I do for stress relief is seek emotional support. So I may call my close friends or my family and talk or hang out. And then ultimate self-care things that I've done to release stress have just been silent self-care retreats of any duration. So I may just take an hour or an afternoon or a couple of days and just stop everything and tend to myself, my emotions, and also take the time to discern my perceptions. If I'm in a stress loop and I'm having a difficult time between perceived things or perceived triggers and real things that are going on for me, I may take some time to just get that straight and discern my perceptions. So ultimately just being with myself during those silent self-care retreats. Again, an hour, an afternoon, it doesn't matter how long. It's just intentional time with myself. So the affirmation for this week is I am safe. So it all boils down to safe. I am safe. So I hope this message, my friend, has helped you and supported you on your path of personal liberation, connection, and peace-filled compassion. My ultimate wish for you is for you to be free. And I just wish you so much peace and joy. Until next time.